What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with the one, the only, the legendary, the certified fantabulous co-host of mine, Mr. Grant Hughes. I don't know why I was super possessive there. Co-host of mine. You can't be anyone else's. You're not even your own co-host. You're not even your own person. We're going to talk about storylines, things that we're monitoring that we think will define the rest of the NBA season. Feels like a good time to do it in large part because we had some expansion content planned for everybody, and the Ringer went off and did their own week. And so it just felt like we didn't want to look like it was cribbing stuff from them. But let the record show, even though you will not see it, we had it. I mean, they had it in the clip too, obviously, but Grant and I had discussed it before the Ringer had their expansion week. Maybe we'll revisit it over the offseason. For now, we're going to dig into storylines and stuff that we're monitoring. But first, the most important question, Hughes, co-host of mine. How are you doing?
I just think that I feel good because another outlet built an entire week around an idea we also had. So it's kind of like a validating. I feel validated. How about that?
Do you feel bugged?
You should feel validated. You were the one that pitched it initially. So I think you should. I mean, it's bittersweet, obviously, because we're not gonna be able to do it. But
I feel paranoid. Like they were because clearly they didn't plan it themselves, and they went and did this like over just the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah, you're either being monitored or, I mean, you are being monitored. We're all being monitored, but, but like, or the groupthink has become so pervasive that it's just like everybody's brains all sync up now. I think on topics and timing of them.
What was interesting to talk the storyline stuff, which was your pitch. So good on you. Shout out, co-host of mine, Grant Hughes. You henceforth will be known as.
Mm-hmm.
What was this exercise like? What did you kind of find yourself gravitating towards before we dig into? And by the way, this is one of the episodes where Grant and I don't know what the other is going to say, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, for me, it was just kind of the All-Star break is not the midpoint. Obviously, we all have to point that out. But it is like the semi-arbitrary cutoff where after it feels like there is kind of this like, oh my God, there's less than 30 games for a lot of teams left. And it does feel kind of sprinty and like, okay, we need to learn X, Y, and Z now before the playoffs because this is our last opportunity. So I definitely view it through that lens of like, what big issues am I still not sure about and frankly, it does tend to skew more towards good teams because that's, this time of year is when you start to see the tankers like capital T tank, and you see the best teams hopefully trying to like work through stuff or establish rotations or see if this weakness that's been an issue all year can be shored up, like that kind of thing. So I definitely just looked at it like, what am I concerned about? What do I not have like a lot of clarity on that feels like a big issue that's going to brush up against? Like, I think what I'm going to wind up doing is talk a lot about like, what will this mean for the playoffs? It's kind of an indirect connection to that. Is that how you view it, or is it more like stuff of the moment stuff?
I think there's some. I mean, it's tough to focus too much on the moment outside of the macro of wins and losses and how does it impact the playoffs? Because sometimes you do get like there's news updates now, but there's nothing that like past the trade deadline, past the All-Star break, like there's aside from injuries, like that, what else are you living in the moment for? Like now kind of feels like we've entered, like this is a prolongated judgment day of these teams or for the most part, you would think they are who they are, except for maybe the teams that made these monster additions at the deadline, like a Lakers or the Warriors as examples.
I think another shift that happens that you just made me think of is that up to the All-Star break, I think we spend a lot of time, focused on younger players, rookies, guys that are like, well, what would it mean if this player got this much better or improved in this way to the team? Like, and you're looking for like, upward trajectory type stuff. Like what's changing? Like what does that mean? Big picture for the team, for the league, whatever. You pass the All-Star break and it's like, well, now if like a rookie has a hot stretch, we'll be like, well, this is a Jalen Green thing, or this is an Anthony Simons thing, or this is a whatever. Like we don't put stock in it, which is probably unfair because the games still count. But we all agree that like it's, there's a lot of mistakes you can make if you're judging things on the last 30 games of the year. So it pivots from that to like now I was watching, we're recording this Friday. I was watching Pacers Grizzlies last night. And like, I catch myself just thinking about like, all right, what does this mean versus a playoff opponent? Like, man, the Pacers got actually really good forward play. Like Obi Toppin looked pretty good. He was hitting threes. Like, hey, what's that mean? In Memphis, Ja Morant doesn't look very springy to me. I wonder what that means. Like, what if, just you're always, I pivot to playoff thinking as opposed to like, let's watch for like the new things that are happening. And you know what I mean? Like there's a real fundamental shift that happens in how I watch games.
It's like bigger picture stuff too,
Yeah.
where it's like even you're watching the games, you're like taking away things from them, but it's less about the individual takeaways and everything for me now, not everything, but most things now come back. Well, how does this impact the aggregate? And I think that's most of my stuff, because even one of my things is like, it's kind of viewed through the lens of one team and player, but it's actually like relating to the entire conference of so that's, I don't know if I do that on purpose or if that's just how my mind works this time of the year.
I think the last thing too is like, by now we have a rough idea of what teams' basic strengths and weaknesses are. And you find yourself looking at like, okay, what can't this team do? Like what is the like little sore spot to pick at? And is what I'm watching showing me any signs that oh, maybe they could do this? Like, oh, maybe they can defend the rim. Oh, maybe they can hold up when this player's off the floor. And you just are kind of like, again, projecting forward. I think like the 50 games we've seen make it so that we have like some pretty well-established priors. And then it's just like, okay, is that good enough? A, and then B, if it's not, like, is there a possibility that this flaw or this deficiency can be like papered over enough to like, okay, well, maybe they won't get bounced in the first round because of it.
Let's get started. And Grant is going to begin for us. Where are we going, Mr. Hughes?
We're going to me putting you on the spot unannounced really quickly. Do you want to, and this is unfair, but whatever. We've been doing this long enough. Do you want to try to guess where I'm going to start?
Oh, yes, please.
Go. Okay. What do you
I think you're going to start with Jimmy Butler and the Golden State Warriors.
You're so wrong, Dan. That's my second item.
I specifically didn't pick anything Warrior specific because I just assumed that you would be on top of that.
Yeah, I hesitated to anyway, that's not where we're starting. We'll get there. I think I'm obligated to start with paying attention to the Thunder offense without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the floor, because it does have an indirect, actually pretty direct relation to Jalen Williams. And I thought you would assume that that's where I was going to start. This team is still just looking like one of the best defenses of all time. That feels really sustainable to me, especially since they did it for most of this year without Chet Holmgren. And I think you and I both agree.
To know where they rank all time in error adjusted defensive rating as of right now, since I just had to write about it?
I would love to know that.
They have, relative to the league average, the 11th best defense of all time. And I feel like they're just going to get into the top 10. I know they might fade a little bit because the 1 seed is locked up, but Chet's back, as you said. And so I think they'll finish as one of the 10 best ever.
And we agree, this isn't part of the discussion. Like Chet is, when he's healthy, just you don't get far in the all defense first team conversation before his name comes up. Like he's that level, right?
Right. And I think when you're talking about defensive player of the year, which is, we'll talk about this eventually, takes on a little bit new meaning now. There might be some people inclined to argue for someone on the Thunder to win that award. They shouldn't, because the player who would win that award is, if Chet was healthy this year, he probably would have been second behind Wemby, and now maybe would have been the favorite for first, because there's a lot of by committee stuff. But just to your point, to back up, like, I think Chet is he is still, to me, the single most important defender on that Thunder team.
Which is bonkers because they're so good without him. But yeah, I agree. So it's been an issue all year, and the Thunder are a team that is good enough to where you really do, like we alluded to at the top, like you really do have to look for, like, okay, where are the questions? And I think this is probably number one, because smart playoff defenses that can spend more time game planning, can spend more time, not just, the obvious thing is like, let's get it out of Shai's hands so that we can turn minutes when he's on the floor, so that we can make those minutes actually resemble the minutes where he's off. Like it's not just going to be as simple as the on-off splits from the regular season just won't translate to the playoffs, because teams are going to be more conscientious. Like, it's coaching malpractice if you don't approach every Thunder game as a playoff opponent and down the stretch opponent of the season. with like job one is like, if we just have to hold down Shea, like whatever that means, that has to be job one. That like, that's obvious for any team with a superstar, but it's more obvious for this one than really any other. So just some numbers, right? The Thunder offense overall 84th percentile, like 119.5 per 100, which actually, like, with a defense that good, that's just absurd. When Shea is off the floor, you lose about 10 points per 100 off that. You go from the 84th percentile to the 22nd percentile. That number's 107. Here's a crazy one with SGA off and with Jalen Williams on. So it's worse with Williams on and SGA off than it is with both of them off. So right there, I think like my bias is like, oh, good. It actually doesn't mean that, that J-Dub is so bad that just like, that doesn't pass the smell test. You're dealing with smaller samples, like, and that margin's pretty close. So it's been pretty clear all year though, that like Jalen Williams as a primary initiator without Gilgeous-Alexander on the floor just isn't good enough, like on offense. It just, even with with the defense that good, they actually do, like, it's kind of shocking. They still, I think, win the minutes that J-Dub is on without SGA, because the defense is still just like, you can't score. But the offense falls apart to the point that it's like we're getting down towards like Wizards levels. So then I looked at like, well, okay, but what about Chet? Because it helps to have a 5 that can space and, you know, handle the ball and do a little bit. That offensive rating, tiny sample, it's like 150 possessions with Williams and Holmgren on without SGA. So it's just like, oh, it's J-Dub plus Holmgren. You don't have SGA still. It's a 115 offensive rating. That's above league average. So it's like, that'll do it. If the defense is going to be that good and you have those two guys out there and you can put any stock in the 150 possessions, that's sufficient. And then you think about too, playoff minutes without SGA are going to be fewer than they have been in the regular season. I think, having looked at all that, if you're a Thunder fan, you should feel a little better. But I do think this will just be tested from moment one of the first round. And as defenses get increasingly more like just effective and well coached, well deployed, it is just going to be the defining aspect of the Thunder's possible championship run. And like, like I said, I think you should feel a little better about the non-SGA minutes offensively, but I don't think you should feel confident. Like, I don't think you should feel like it's not a problem. But where are you on it? Like, I know I threw a lot of numbers out there, but like, do you think that Chet being back sort of forces us to reevaluate the whole thing? Or is this a problem that like, we really are just, it's going to need to be proven wrong by the Thunder?
I think so. I think it's both, if that's weird. I appreciate your proprietary metrics as always, though. That was really, I think those were really instructional, because I do think it's overblown, because I think they have the personnel and just the lineup flexibility to overcome it and be better when they're at full strength in the non-SGA minutes. But we haven't seen it in the playoffs. And given how J-Dub struggled offensively in the playoffs last year, there's a lot of, you need to do it in the playoffs for it to matter. And the fact that they haven't caps lock done it during the regular season, now you could say it's because Chet was absent. I also think what was really encouraging, they have about a league average offense when it's J-Dub and Isaiah Hartenstein on with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander off. And I was going to ask you, even though you were just talking for a while, so I don't mean to throw it back on you, would there be anything too? It's probably easier to do in the regular season than the playoffs. Would you ever consider maybe throwing the kitchen sink of alternatives on the court without Shai, where we're going to play Holmgren and Hartenstein and Jalen Williams when Shai is on the bench for however long it ends up being, just to kind of, in theory, overload inferior lineups of the other team? Or is it, no, you can't do that? Like, you could, like, that's not an approach you should take. And maybe it would speak to a flaw of the roster where, well, if you think you need all three of those guys on the court without Shai, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think so. I did look up, I wanted to know what, I didn't assume there'd be much. And there's like 3 possessions, I think, of both bigs, of Chet, Hartenstein, and J-Dub without SGA. And it's like, okay, that's useless. We can't learn anything from that.
Well, hold on. Those are 3 whole possessions.
Yeah, I can't remember what I think the numbers were very good. So it probably means like they hit a 3 on 2 of them or something, and like the other team turned it over once, and it's like, oh, they're plus 1,000 per 100. That's pretty good. So I think that gets into, I think, yes, short answer, yeah, you got to just, do what you can to get the best possible lineups on the floor when SGA is not out there. But I think that gets us into like and this is me trying to absolve J-Dub of some of the blame here. Like, could it also just be the case that in addition to him not just demonstrably not being great as a first option, you can't even say he's been good. Is it that plus like, well, I mean, if you got, I don't know, whoever else you have out there, Isaiah Joe and Wiggins and Dort or whoever else spends time on the floor, like all those guys for the most part, Wiggins, I guess, is a little bit of an exception, are really dependent scorers. And like a defense can not relax, but like it's different than if there was like, who's the secondary creator when SGA is off the floor like that? It's like, it's rough. It falls to a guy that, either is out there because he plays defense or is like 8th, 9th, 10th in the rotation. Like so, that seems to be some of it. So you know what I mean? So I think like if you did just say when SGA is off, we got to have like our other 4 best offensive players out there. It's not the craziest solution.
Yeah, I hate to, because J-Dub is still, his career is still so young. I don't want to gravitate immediately towards, oh, he's not number 1 option material, but this might just prove that, okay, well, if he's going to be that, it's clear that he's not that yet. And,
oh, yeah, that's fair. He just isn't right now. Like,
and
that's
I
totally
think the biggest difference I see is he struggles with his decision making when he's commanding that much extra defensive attention. I think it's most evident. You could see it in maybe the types of threes he's taking as I throw my phones everywhere. But I really think it's more evident when you look at like what happens inside the arc with him. Like his 2-point percentage basically declines by 10 points when Shea's off the court. And so like the gravity that Shea has, I'm then wondering if I think anyone could be dependent on this to an extent, unless you're a top 5 player in the, like if that's your criticism of J-Dub and you're offended by it, if that's our criticism, I don't know what to tell you. But like Shea has so much gravity. He's so talented that it doesn't matter. Like, does the Thunder have, I'm not trying to absolve Jalen Williams here either, but like when you're looking at those lineups and fleshing them out, is there enough supplementary gravity to where J-Dub is like, well, you don't, this defense doesn't feel comfortable having like 3 or 4 sets of eyes on him at any given point. And I think Chet changes that materially. But if you're not going to play him and Isaiah Hartenstein together during those minutes, which again, there's no samples, there's barely any sample size there, and Chet hasn't been healthy enough, or Isaiah Hartenstein for that matter, to there be a sample size. How much of a difference is that really then? Like going from Chet, I want to make clear, Chet's a better player than Isaiah Hartenstein. But offensively, when you look at what Hartenstein can do as a screener on the interior, as a passer, like the gap offensively, if you're just going from one to the other, how much are you adding to those Thunder units without Shea?
Yeah, I think Hartenstein can, like, Hub is like you're running everything through him, but I do think Hartenstein really can be, it's the pick and roll, he short rolls and then he makes the decision. Like we've seen that work pretty well. So that's one way. I think the other thing is like, this isn't solving it, but it's almost like masking the problem enough to get away with it, which is that when Chet is in the game, the Thunder they're better at getting to the rim. Like, go figure, you have a 5 that pulls the center out, like that works. And they get out in transition more. That's partly because he's just such a disruptive defender and he's blocking shots and he's forcing like ugly misses that trigger more up-tempo play. If you can, I mean, it's the kind of workaround we talk about a lot where it's like, just make transition happen more often and like, just really space the basic stuff. Like, it doesn't have to be J-Dub needs to like ascend as a pick and roll maestro or become an isolation monster. It's like, you can just create situations that are better for, high expected value possessions. And that has less to do with J-Dub maybe than you would think. Like, I think probably the most likely solution is you using Chet and other players. You just like make the tempo different, and that gets you enough transition chances to, not be 107 points per 100. Like, maybe you're at 112, 113. You lose the minutes without Shea by a couple points instead of, 6-7. And that could just be the difference between winning and losing.
That actually is a nice segue into my question on this is, how much does even focusing on this matter when in the postseason? And if you use last year as the analog, through the 10 games, they played 10 postseason games last year, right? I think it was.
Right.
Shea was off the court for like 80 minutes.
Right.
So he's going to play 40 minutes a game. And so you're talking about 8 minutes a game. And I know those can swing. I think that's enough. We've seen it with Joel Embiid in Philly to where if you're that reliant on one person for offense, it can swing an entire series. But when you're this good on defense, like how much does what we're talking about actually matter? And this is with the caveat, there's a ton of noise in there. The Thunder are actually a +7 overall in the playoffs without Shea on the court last year.
Right. And yet the narrative was just like, right. Like, cause Jalen had a bad, like individual postseason. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, no. And I think the more we talk about it, the more I'm interested in like, how do teams defend the Thunder like with SGA on? Like, what is it just going to be 2 on the ball every single time? And you're just daring somebody else to do something. And what does that look like? It'd be fascinating to see.
I still think that might be the way to go at them, because doesn't it seem like OKC's other players, and I mean, Shea can be a part of this too, but he's the one drawing all these players to the ball. Like they have this, basically any lineup they roll out there, they have pristine spacing, but like their players are so conditioned to like drive, like they get drive pilled, where I've kind of seen it with the Knicks or Karl Anthony Towns specifically. They're just not going to generate a ton of above the break 3-point attempts because they have so much spacing. They're going to be conditioned to attack. And I'm wondering if you're a defense, like having someone other than Shea get downhill is probably, would you view that as more of a victory than getting them to settle for like a catch and shoot 3-pointer?
Oh yeah, definitely. Cause that's what you don't have when SGA is not in control of the ball. Like if you can get any kind of like, I don't know, a facsimile of what he does so well, then you're in good shape.
So that might be something to watch, but I think, do you think that's the right way to defend him, or do you think it's different? Is it
I think if I'm going into a series with the Thunder,
someone else beats you, that's what happens.
Exactly. I just want the ball. Anybody else, if we lose because SGA like lights us up and gets to the line 15 times, you don't want to lose that way, because that's the way everyone predicts you're going to lose. Like I think you'd rather see Williams have a couple 40-point games or something, because it's just like, well, we know SGA is going to light us up if we're not careful. Like the other thing is an iffier proposition.
Let's move on here. It is my turn, and I'm going to bring up the Knicks, but I'm also kind of like, it's my question of, can anybody in the East beat the Cavs or the Celtics? Like, or is this just a 2-team race in the East? And I think I'm focusing on the Knicks because it does feel like they should have the best chance when you look at their vitals. And if you zoom out and just say, okay, they are still in the bottom 10 of points allowed per possession when they face a top 20 offense. So again, not top 10, a top 20 offense. But Mitchell Robinson hasn't played, and they expect him to return by the end of this month. We've heard that before, but again, how much does that matter? Because one, I think it comes down to 2 elements. How much is he actually going to play? Well, I guess 3. How much is he actually going to play? What does he look like? But then how important is he in these matchups specifically against Cleveland and Boston? Because against Cleveland, I see it. They're not like a great rebounding team, despite having Mobley and Allen on the floor a bunch together. Robinson can certainly do that, can punish them there. Going to give you size. I think for the way that the Cavs play offense this year, he's probably worse suited to stay on the court just because of their off-ball movement. But just like we've seen what he can do defensively against them in the past as well. But like against Boston, am I out of my mind to say that I don't really think that Mitchell Robinson matters, or at least playing him next to Karl Anthony Towns is never going to be the answer to me based off how Boston is built and then just what you're giving up offensively. And then if you want to say he's going to matter against Boston, I'm wondering, well, is that because Karl Anthony Towns, like that's not a matchup he can play 35 plus minutes in which case now you've opened up a whole different can of worms that we need to discuss.
So this is also one of mine, or not exactly what you're asking, but basically the Cat Mitchell Robinson, like how much does it really matter is actually what I have in my notes, because I've been stuck on that all year, because just the Robinson absence is like the one, okay, like that could mean something for this Knicks team that's otherwise like, we get it. Their 5 guys play a zillion minutes. We like a couple reserves. And if they have an issue, it's interior defense and Cat being the last line and on and on. Like this has been a pretty well understood team and strengths and weaknesses in the whole package. So a couple numbers that like, you can tell me if this makes you feel better or worse. So Mitchell Robinson has not played all year. Basically, opponents' rim attempt frequency and accuracy is like unchanged year over year compared to last year and this year. So like the Knicks profile in terms of rim protection, they last year 34.1% opponent rim attempt frequency, this year 35.5. So a little more frequent, not a big deal. Accuracy was 64.8% allowed last year, 63.8 this year. So it's like, oh, Robinson's going to come in. I'm not saying you or I ever said this, because the rim protection aspect of Robinson's game has always been a little overblown. Like that's not like the number one thing he's done. He's a big body. He's athletic. Like, you know, he's had super high block rates in the past, all that stuff. But that's not really where he's going to help. So like, if you're looking for Robinson to suddenly make it so, oh, the Knicks, like it's a no-fly zone around the rim because Robinson's back and the Knicks are a different defense, like that isn't going to be, the numbers say that is not going to be what changes. What I think does change is just the Knicks were first and second in offensive rebound rate the last 2 years. This year they're ninth, still good, but it's like they were it was a superpower the last couple years, there was all those stats that we talked about all the time about how like all the threes they generate specifically off those offensive boards and how much that propped up the offense that had like a shitty effective field goal percentage. But oh my God, they get all these like super high value second chance looks. So he will affect that. I guess like this will be less interesting. I agree he matters. Robinson does against the Cavs. I just don't understand how he's like a plus other than just pure depth if Cat gets in foul trouble against Boston because of the way, you know, Boston's bigs aren't bigs. Every guy they put out there that can defend bigs will shoot threes and will be on the perimeter. And Robinson is just like, you can't, I mean, Cat's going to have enough trouble like chasing Porzingis or Horford, or even like Xavier Tillman's going to shoot threes. If you have both bigs out there, it's like, so I guess the Celtics will just score 1,000 points in the paint because they just won't be able to dribble contain, you know, like I don't know how it helps against Boston at all.
No. And it'd be different if like, I guess you got to say that Cat was more like Evan Mobley or Jared Allen, to where if you really want to, and I know you're saying that Mitchell Robinson's primary strength isn't necessarily like shot deterrence at the rim, but like if you're able to park him as the low man,
sure.
And then like you have someone like Karl-Anthony Towns who can, and look, Towns probably might be better suited just being more aggressive, but doesn't mean he's going to be good at it, especially against that team. So if you had the synergy or the type of makeup that Cleveland's two bigs do, I could kind of see how it would help against Boston. And like I said, I can see how it will help against Cleveland. You do have to ask now, are the second chance opportunities, is the defensive rebounding that's not even really a problem for you right now on most nights? Like, is that enough of value add to where you just get less dynamic on offense? Because it's not just, I mean, it is just Mitchell Robinson can't space the floor, but like his hands are terrible. It's like you can't even, if he's going to catch, you can't count on him to one, actually control it, and then two, decision make outside of being able, unless he's right at the hoop, to do something there. And I want to be open to the idea that, all right, well, it's just another body that can soak up minutes and maybe you'll alleviate the pressure on. Look, the other night against Chicago, where the Knicks, they were banged up, but it's just like Jalen Brunson logged under 40 minutes in an overtime game, and I was shocked. But like everybody else is like, you're over 40, and it's, people are tired of us, not even us. We probably focus on it less, but like they don't want to talk about the Knicks minutes and the injuries. But when you see things crop up like Josh Hart, runner's knee management, like that's a use thing. And so just having another body to alleviate, like if Hart and Anunoby, when they're healthy, can play fewer minutes for the rest of the regular season, I just don't know how much it matters in the aggregate. And so it does circle back to, let me ask one of two questions, and let's have a brutally honest answer to this. Are the Knicks legitimate championship contenders this season?
I think I have to say, well, I guess, what do you mean by contender? Like,
can I give you the answer?
It's just no, right?
The answer is no, and we shouldn't be afraid to say it because, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I don't think you can make a credible argument that they're on the level of Cleveland or Boston and throw in the Thunder in the West. Like, I think those are your three, obviously. And then the Knicks are in the mix with a half dozen other teams that I'd kind of put in the same tier below that. So I guess like if that top three are your true actual contenders, like they win the title, you just say like, yeah, I get it. The Knicks are not in that group. So I guess I think, yeah, I just have talked myself into like definitively saying they're not, if that's your contender class, they're not in it.
And look, I think when you're built the way this isn't to say they're really good. And the
Mhm.
offense is just even when the offense is off, it's on. But they're not a deep team. And for as dynamic as they seem on the wings, like they're just not able to be dynamic enough on the defensive end because their two most important players are players that other teams will go at. And I think like one of them, you're going to come away from most games and say, fuck, one of them was really bad or that was the weak point. And I think against Boston specifically, Karl-Anthony Towns is the bigger, just based off what we've seen so far this season.
Mhm.
Now, I think every game they have left against Boston, against Cleveland, they've already played OKC twice. It's going to be used as a barometer. As we record this, they're playing the Cavs on Friday night. That's not going to be a good game to measure. The Knicks are banged up. They're coming off the second night of a back-to-back. But, like, these games matter as a litmus test. And for the Knicks, more so, I think it's going to be about what within reason can or should they do after this season to get on the level of a Cleveland or Boston, because they don't have, I mean, they are the betting favorites to land Giannis Antetokounmpo somehow. Did you see
Which
that?
is beyond insane. Like with what?
Well, remember we almost recorded when we saw the rumor that league executives thought the Knicks acquire Karl-Anthony Towns to make it easier to trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo?
Yeah.
I have no idea through how that's possible. Is it, well, Towns is matching salary, or it's Towns is such a good fit next to Giannis? My whole thing is they don't have a ton of stuff they could do, but like the information on specifically, look, Towns and Ariel Huck-Porty, the sample size is like 30 something possessions. They've killed it. Now teams are not hitting threes or shots at the rim, but like maybe there's something to replicate there. And perhaps the dual bigs have a bigger impact than we're crediting right now. But I think it's time to acknowledge this Knicks team is really good. And if you want to say that we're shrinking the contender window too much, but we have the Thunder, the Cavs, and the Celtics. If I were to throw out other teams in the West, like I would be less surprised, and tell me if you agree, if the Nuggets won the title.
No, I agree. I think the Nuggets are higher or closer to the top tier than the Knicks are.
And I think it gets spicier when you say, would you be more or less surprised if the Grizzlies, let's say, made the finals?
I think similarly surprised, I guess. Maybe
What I'm
less.
getting at is it shouldn't be that much of a debate if the Knicks are a contender because
Yeah,
they're
you're
also.
right.
And so what I would then ask you to wrap this up, are the Knicks, insofar as there is a third threat to come out of the East, is it still the Knicks? Like, does that need to be the default pick, or do you look at some of these other teams? And I would say specifically at this point, Giannis just exists. And so there's Milwaukee. And then, I mean, like Indiana, I said this, I don't think it was a podcast that you and I did together. At this rate, and like, I'm not, this isn't even just, I watched the Grizzlies Pacers game too on Thursday. This isn't me just saying it off that. I said it before. The way the Pacers are built and being able to push different buttons that the Knicks can't, I think I trust them in a playoff series more than I trust the Knicks against the Celtics or the Cavs. And that might be a take that ages poorly, but then that might say more about the separation between Boston, Cleveland, and then everybody else in the East.
I would say it's harder than I am comfortable with to say the Knicks are definitely better than the Pacers. Because I mean, certainly lately the Pacers have like, okay, well, remember earlier in the season we were like, oh my God, this is like a failed like soft rebuild. That's like they're not going to be any good. They're like 50. I think they won 15 of 20 is the stat I just saw. Like, okay, so that's. I think I like the Knicks a little better than the Pacers, but I guess I would say I still would put the Knicks third. But yeah, Milwaukee, Indiana, if Orlando could shoot or had been healthy all year, that might be an interesting thing. Like, I don't know how far down you want to go, but yeah, I think you're right. If the purpose here was to establish the Knicks are not a true blue contender, I think we've succeeded.
Just very quickly on why I would say I like the Pacers more is I think that they've shown a more sustainable defensive peak than the Knicks. Like during this stretch, or since January 1, so we're talking about 20 games, they're just 8th in points allowed per possession. That is just not, the Knicks have not had this season, to the best of my knowledge, a 20-game stretch where they have been in the top 8 of points allowed per possession. And so,
yeah, but Dan, that season opener where they gave up like 200 points, that's still skewing the.
Look, honestly, they're
trying to trigger you.
They're 18th in points allowed per possession against top 10 offenses, and that's with that opening night against Boston filtered in. And so, like, that's a win, I guess. But, and I look, anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I want to be wrong about this, but I just feel like that. I don't know if it's because we're like the East is the East, and so we're just the Knicks are third, and we're penciling like they're comfortably third, so we're just going to pencil them in there. I don't think people are being critical enough of the season because they're a really good team, and I mean critical in the sense of I don't know what they were supposed to fix. They don't have the tools to fix it at the deadline, but just kind of like being okay with this is a fine season. But when you go all in to the extent that the Knicks did, I don't care that you're slated to face Boston in the second round. Like if you just get bounced in the second, and if it's not close, like that is what that needs to be the success. I won't kill the Knicks if they lose in the second round, which I think is what's going to most likely happen. They're going to be third. It's going to set them up to play Boston in round 2, and they're going to lose. Yeah. That's what I would predict. If you go down in like 4 or 5 games, you need like after what you did over the past year plus, like in terms of trading and remaking the roster, I'm not going to call for them to trade everybody and blow it up. Like, no, that fucking matters. And it's a conversation that'll need to be had. Look, I'm getting squeaky. So you triggered me.
Let's go from the contender to the championship favorite. I don't know if you heard, but the Warriors will win the championship. What do you like? Okay. Obviously that's when Draymond said that, and doubled down on it. And it was in front of a San Francisco crowd. And like, he
also thinks that the league teams only shoot threes or some shit. Right. So I'm questioning Draymond's IQ all over again.
Like the reputation is one of the smartest players ever is going to anyway. So before we get into the merits of it, I would just point out that in the recent past, the war, like Kerr and even Steph and a lot of people associated with the team have said like I'm paraphrasing, but have essentially like admitted when they don't have it. Like what they kind of have been pretty forthright when they've had teams that are just like, we're not at the level that we used to be, or we're not in that top level. I think they have admitted that fairly readily in the past, over the past few seasons. So like, I do think despite it being objectively wild that Draymond said that, it to me indicates like they actually might like collectively think something close to that as a team with Jimmy Butler on board. We don't need to get into like how valid that is. Cause I just think even you can't say that 3 games into the guy's time with the team and one player just can't be that impactful with all the problems the Warriors have. But I think we do need to like using the small sample we've had so far, there'll be another game played by the time you hear this. And they're playing the Kings on Friday. Like from what you've seen, would you agree that Jimmy Butler, whatever he does to lift the overall ceiling, like really, really clearly addresses like a couple of the biggest problems that this team has in a way that like does in fact like kind of change things from a like this team is a 500 team to okay, they could win a round and like get interesting beyond that potentially. Is that overblowing it?
No, because you're talking to first of all, you're talking to the wrong person about this. I just wrote about how I think the Warriors are going to finish in the top 6 for the regular season. And I think I would have to double check, but like the odds of that are just not in their favor because they have, as we're recording this, 4 losses to make up and like inside of 30 games to go. That's really hard to do. But what you just said, I think what the Jimmy Butler trade, if we had to kind of boil it down to a simplified take, did more than anything, it gave the Warriors actual lightning in a bottle potential now because of the things that he can potentially address, which is another from scratch sort of creator. They have never, well, I'll say during this Steph era, they've never had a perimeter player that can put pressure on the rim and generate free throws like he can. You've already mentioned the sample size is very small. The offense has been really good when he plays without Steph, Grant. So far, that's a big fucking deal. And so if you put the Warriors, let's say they get out of if you put the Warriors in a playoff series, these are the teams I'm prepared to guarantee that they will not beat. The Thunder, and that's it.
Yeah.
And like I would still have the Nuggets ahead of them. I want to make that clear. But if you're getting into like in a playoff series, I'm going to need to see a hell of a lot more from a Houston, from a Memphis, from the Lakers to say like, no, like they're definitely better equipped to beat the Thunder or the Nuggets than the Warriors might be in a vacuum. So I don't think I would argue that you're not Warriors pilled enough.
Oh boy, is that what we're doing? Well, so yeah, I do think the one of the most interesting aspects of the storyline I'm watching here, which I should have been more explicit about, is like how good is this Warriors team down the stretch, like post addition. Like I think the Butler, it was almost a rhetorical ask of you, like yeah, Butler getting to the line and actually also like curbing turnovers, just because like when he has the ball, things get simplified. It's like he's gonna make the right pass. He doesn't swing for home runs very much, which everybody else that's on the ball for the Warriors tends to do. So you cut the turnovers, you slow the game down, you make the rest for Steph actually extend because you're shooting free throws all the time if Butler's on the floor and Steph is not. So like it counts double. Like there are real like knock-on effects of like the couple things that he does very, very well. In addition to the whole like, oh shit, he might just be the best player in a playoff series, regardless of who's on the other side. Like that's actually still possible. What I'm actually most interested in now is like, so what is the best lineup for this team against the best opponents? Like it's just not going to include spacing. And how big of a deal is that? Because you're going to reintroduce Jonathan Kuminga pretty soon. And you would assume whether he starts or not, if he's not in a closing lineup, everybody's upset, include him, ownership, like everybody's pissed off if Kuminga is not right back out there late in
Can I
camp.
interject for a second? Just given the trajectory of how things have gone with Kuminga and Golden State, isn't that almost what you expect to have? Like, there's always another shoe that's dropping, or like there's highs and lows, and there's never like an in between.
Yeah, it's insane. It's the biggest yo-yo effect ever. I just like my opinion. I think you have to at least give it a real extended look over these last 30 or so games with Steph, Butler, Kuminga, Draymond, I guess Pajemski or Moody. I don't know who you're like. I think Buddy Hield has kind of played himself out, even though like God, they need a gravity kind of type of shooter, and he just hasn't been it. I think you have to really give that a long look and see how viable the offense is, because you want to be switchable and athletic and have more rim pressure, which Kuminga provides in addition to Butler and Draymond. Like those three guys can really kind of give you some real variety on both ends. I think you're obligated to give that as long of a look as you possibly can. Whether they'll do that or not, hard to say, because like you pointed out, like sometimes they just don't do it. I really think that Kuminga can be an additive player, but man, we've seen him just go into the tank when he isn't, getting big time on ball reps in a major role. And with Butler there, it's way harder for him to be in that position. And like, that's a knock that matters to him and that affects how he plays, but it is just reality. So I'll be watching like, well, what version of Kuminga from a motivational, like an aggressiveness and confidence standpoint is going to show up. And then how healthy is he? This is a really long layoff for an ankle injury. And then how much rope do the Warriors give this, what should I think be their most dangerous lineup?
I'm so curious to see what the integration of Kuminga, like what is the offense? I know, so we know what their top four players in theory should be. So who would your preferred? You already mentioned Buddy Hield, but like, who would your preferred default fifth guy be? Or like, what do you like? How do you play Draymond, Jimmy Butler, and Kuminga together schematically? It's just like, is it like Kuminga has to be a spacer around Draymond and Jimmy with Steph actions right a lot of the time, or no? Like, what is?
Yeah, he does. And he shot 40% from three in like the 15 or 20 games prior to injury. Like he was making threes. We always talk about though, like every defense is going to be like, thank you for shooting that still. Like he's not the guy that you're freaking out about,
Can he turn back the clock to preseason shooting? That was something else.
So yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like. He will have to space and be opportunistic in attacking closeouts. And honestly, like you're not putting your best, most athletic defender on him. So that's a plus, because that guy's going to have to guard Butler now. And your quickest, sharpest wing is going to be on Steph. Like, so there will be opportunities. I think the fifth guy right now, I think Pajemski's playing the best. I think Moody's pretty close. But if Pajemski can make threes, then he gives you another guy that'll make plays too, which still matters. So it'll be fluid. Unfortunately, it would be nice if Pajemski just had like a stranglehold on it, but he just doesn't. And I think Moody can be the better guy on some nights, but I don't know, unless I'm just grossly overlooking somebody, I'm not really thinking that hard about anybody else for that that last spot. Unless Hield gets like, first 15 games hot, which feels like the exception to the rule now.
Well, also is sort of what you've laid out. So it's not going to be like their default is Draymond at the 5.
I'm just thinking like you're trying to win the last 5 minutes. That's who's got to be out there.
Yeah.
It does seem like Quentin Post, I think, is going to get the, like, you're going to get up 3 threes in your first stint. And if you make 1 or 2 of them, you might see some second half action. And if you don't, it's going to be Looney. And then that exacerbates the spacing crunch. I mean, even more. But I think TJD is out of the rotation just because he just isn't doing enough to justify playing over Looney or Post. But yeah, I kind of feel like it's going to be a lot of Looney, and you're going to look at lineups that sometimes have Steph's the only guy you care about as a spacer, and like what happens then,
My next one, so we'll go negative here for a second. Looking at who, it's not, I don't want to say who has more on the line, but I'm kind of looking at what is the fallout from what we kind of know is going to happen the rest of this season and like who's going to have it worse looking into the offseason if they quote unquote fail this year, between Dallas, Philly, Sacramento, and Phoenix. And I think you can look at Phoenix and say, okay, they clearly have the most hopeless financial and asset situation, but the Kings like kind of didn't pivot into a rebuild after moving Fox, and like what the Mavericks made one of the worst or most confusing trades of all time. And then Philly, okay, you can say the thing I can't get to with Philly, and I'm not saying they're my pick, but just get to the play-in and be reasonably healthy. And like, what have you seen anything from this team at even close to full strength that makes you think like, yeah, like that's what they need to do? Because I have yet to see that. Like, come talk to me when the big 3 is like running opponents off the floor. So I find it fascinating because there's going to be fallout, and maybe Dallas might have the most Teflon stomach for what comes next, because Nico Harrison is clearly just like, that organization is just dancing to the beat of a different drum right now. But of those 4, who would you pick where it's, I don't know if it's saying they're going to be under the most pressure, or which team is going to have like the most egregious fallout from because the Suns might not even make the play-in right now, too. Like, and ditto for the Sixers as we're recording this.
It's funny because one of my items was like, who's the next class of blow it up candidates, and it features 3 of the teams you mentioned. So we have, again, a kind of similar thing that'll dovetail.
Who did it
together.
not include?
Who else do I have? Oh, I have the Bucks and Pelicans on there, but those are like more. They're a little bit different than the class of teams you mentioned, but it's close enough we can talk about it. So for the Sixers, like, you asked, like, what have we seen that suggests like, oh, there's something in there? Like, what have we heard? And the answer to that is, what we've heard is Joel Embiid, twice now in the last few weeks, saying like, I'm not there, and I won't be, like performance wise until I get this knee fixed. Like, it's so you haven't seen anything on the floor. And what we're hearing is he's telling you, I can't get there. And whatever hope you have of the Sixers, making a magical play into conference finals or anything kind of run, it's all dead if Embiid is this. And like, he just is saying he will be this until he gets his knee fixed. And like, the real talking about fallout is like, he might be this, period. Like, you can only go, fix the knee so many times until it's like, no, this bad news, it is fixed. Like, this is as fixed as it gets. So that's like the catastrophizing angle to take here, but like, it's in play. So fallout wise, like, yeah, the Sixers might really just be in a position where Embiid isn't going to be able to play frequently or at a high level ever again. And what do you do from there? And you got Paul George on this deal, and yeah, it's just a finger or whatever, but also look at his age, look at just the production. That's bad. I still just think, well, I don't know. It really is between them and the Suns, right? Because the Suns have gone all in to the most extreme degree, and with the worst results for an all in we've seen in a long time. It just feels to me like the Suns have outs that the Sixers don't. You know what I mean? If they need to, you can trade Durant. You don't want to, but you can trade Booker, and then you're back to sort of being a more normal team. Whereas the Sixers, it's like, well, if Embiid is damaged goods, what are you gonna? Can you trade him for anything? And can you trade Paul George for anything? So I think, like, I know your question isn't like who's worse off, but it almost feels like it's the Sixers, doesn't it?
I go back and forth on that because I see what you're saying. The Suns have outs, but like their out is very specific to where they have traded away so much of their draft and like swapped out so many things that unless you're getting back your own picks, like, okay, well then what? Like, okay, you will get more assets if you trade Kevin Durant than if you trade Paul George or probably even Joel Embiid right now. But like when you don't have any of your own picks through 2031, unless you're getting your own picks back as part of that trade, like what's the point? And I think with the Sixers, at least you look at it and say, Tyrese Maxey's still there. They have some of their draft moving forward. They have other draft picks already moving forward. If the Suns move Kevin Durant, like why isn't Devin Booker just next?
Well,
and
yeah.
Then where are you? Like you can't point to the Suns and say, well, we know Devin Booker's going to be there. Because I would argue if Devin Booker's on the Suns beyond next season, I'd probably be shocked at this point.
Does it help at all that the obvious trade, whether you're talking about Booker or Durant, just is to Houston and then you do get some of your picks back like that? I mean, I'm not saying I'm sort of asking the question like, oh, what if it is the Sixers that are worse off? I'm not sure. They're both in big trouble in different ways, but the Suns do have the Rockets just sitting right there needing an offensive centerpiece. And they have your picks. So like,
with the Sixers though, isn't there more hope of this working out? And it's in the sense of maybe you get another semi-healthy season from Joel Embiid. Whereas with the Suns, it feels like when they've been healthy, they've been worse.
That's right.
That doesn't really make it like, it's just the setup they have no outs to augment it. And so you have to get out of it completely. Whereas the Sixers, it's, yes, Joel Embiid might be cooked, but like we've also seen him miss a ton of time in the past, and like this isn't ideal. But maybe his knee has another which, by the way, can we spend a second on that? If you need to get stuff, why are we not getting it fixed? And like, let's run it back next year and open.
That's a whole other part of this conversation of like we've had discussions about whether it made sense for the Sixers to tank, and we've said, well, they're not going to be able to maximize that pick enough because there's too far to fall. They can't make up that ground. And the odds of that pick being great enough to justify a tank aren't high. Now it's what you're talking about of like, just start the recovery clock now as opposed to waiting, because maybe this way you have like a full off season and like you're ready to go in October. The longer you wait, like you can't have this like gradual ramp up shit anymore. Like you got to be ready to go in 25, 26. So like, I think the only move now is to call it right. And just, if somebody needs surgery, you get it done tomorrow. And this season is a wash, and whatever happens with that pick, whatever, that's not the point
about that anymore.
It isn't.
Right? It's
no,
if you want any chance, like it's try to get Joel Embiid right for next year. Like fuck the pick at this point.
Yeah. So the other thing, I think you made the best argument that the Suns are sort of like worse off, because with the Sixers, you can still say, well, we haven't seen like the full realization of our vision. Because like, oh, Paul George missed time and Embiid's not his best or whatever. The Suns have like kind of been pretty healthy with like, relatively speaking, with all three of those guys, and the team's bad and they don't have ways to fix it. And so like this was the vision and it sucks. Like they just don't have a way to get better. They can't fall back on like, well, if this changes next year, it's like, no, this is your team. Like you're just locked in.
And there's also 11 of at least that isn't yet emanating out of Philly, and maybe it will. There's like a level of dysfunction there that makes this even worse, because the whole Kevin Durant trade stuff, that you weren't talking to him about it, and then he finds out about it through that way, and he had to turn down the trade because it sounds like it wasn't so much about the Warriors, it's just he didn't want to move mid-season. What was the logic here? I'm not saying you need to work in collaboration with every player to trade them, but when it's Kevin Durant and you know Kevin Durant's track record and you know that like he's not under contract for that much longer, what are you doing?
And like with a 100% I don't know, accuracy rate, once the Durant is like not super happy bell gets rung, it's never unrung. It always, every single time, it has concluded with changing teams every time it's happened. So like, you're going to get reports of like, it's fine. And there's been some mitigation even now of how like, he's like, it wasn't about the Warriors. I just didn't want to get traded. It's like, the alarm has already sounded and now it's just a when. Like Brian Windhorst said, like, everybody under the sun expects him to be traded. Even him.
For him of all people to say that too, Windhorst, because he knows all this shit. And then it's like, he'll talk about how he knew it before it happened. But for him to say it preemptively, I mean, he's gone.
Yeah.
So I did, just to mention them quickly, I can't bring myself to pick the Kings, even though they're like probably one of the most confusing teams in the league, at least internally, how they view themselves and have gone about trying to improve or position themselves. Domantas Sabonis is really good, and they have the bones of like, this team will be solid.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they even have a pathway to being better than that, like better than what they were with Fox at this moment anytime soon. I think I would have them like lowest on this list in terms of, okay, well, what's the fallout look like? Maybe I'm wrong there, because Dallas, I'm just like, are we just sure Kyrie wants to sign up for all this again? And if he decides to leave or even gets wandering eyes, like, what does that mean for, like, Anthony Davis injured right now? But like, him having to be the subject of, I know the fans haven't attacked Anthony Davis personally. I want to make that clear, but like, the rhetoric surrounding that trade is always gonna be like, you were fucking stupid for trading Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis. There has to be a part of him. They'll pay him, they'll extend him. Maybe that money heals all, but doesn't there have to be a part of him that doesn't want to be like related to this, like tethered to this at all?
Right. Yeah. He's like, it's not quite guilty by association, but like the stain of the trade that has nothing to do with him is on him. And it's just like, that sucks. He's in a position where, unless he just is a finals MVP and wins them a championship, it's like, what's he going to do that could be good enough, you know? And it's not his fault. He didn't ask for this.
And at this rate, he's going to have to do it at the center position with the way big men are dropping it.
Yeah, right. No big guy stays healthy there. I mean, you want to talk about fallout though. Like, you know, there was all that talk about like just the Mavs lost like hundreds of thousands of followers on social. Like I'm the last person that gives a shit about that, but it's like coupled with the fan revolt, like you really might have cost yourself like a generation of fans that are just like, never again, you know, like that feels pretty real. And what does that mean for like the team on the floor? Maybe not much, but like that's like a level of fallout, I guess, to keep using the word, that none of these other teams are facing, to where it's like you've alienated a lot of people that just will never trust the franchise, the ownership, because that's the constant. They're never going to trust this ownership group. Nico Harrison, like, how long is Nico Harrison going to be there? There already been whispers that like he doesn't want to do this forever, but it's like, well, he's gone in a year.
He thinks the long term is 3 years, so that's, that's about right. Like,
which maybe he's just being honest about the tenure of an executive, but still, yeah, Dallas is a different class. The Kings want to be decent, and they're going to be decent, and or maybe they want to be more than decent, but they're conducting business as if they want to be decent, and they will hit that goal. And there's a firm cap on that, I think. And I don't know, it's just they're Bulls West. It feels like to some extent. I mean, literally, given their wings.
Yeah, I mean, they're really, and even just like the setup of just, let's put like a defensive liability behind those. I just don't.
Yeah.
My pick would be the Suns, and I might actually elevate the Mavericks over the Sixers, just because they're almost stuck in a way that might be good, where we're not going to trade Joel Embiid the nadir of his value right now. So you might as well have him get surgery, and hopefully he gives you, if he gives you 50 games next year and like he's just healthy for the playoffs, like, you have that out. I guess Dallas does still kind of have that out, and Max Christie's look pretty good for that. I don't know, but I think the Suns are the pick for me in terms of the team that I think will have the most fallout from.
I think you talked me into it. It's just like the blow up's pretty imminent there. I want to talk about before we get to we just have the one more. We'll get to the Spurs in a minute with the Wemby of it all, but I want to talk about the Luka Lakers stuff, because now that the main justification for him being traded is just out there as like, oh, conditioning, commitment, like we don't believe in him long term. I find myself, and I think in general, like people are viewing him through that lens. So it's like you see him against Charlotte the other night, and it's like 5 turnovers in the first quarter, no lift, just looks like he can't move. Looks awful. Like, I think he almost had a triple double, which like kind of tells you like what he can do anyway. But the Lakers do lose that game to a terrible Hornets team, and Luka was really, really bad, looked really bad physically. And it's like, oh, now he really has to prove that narrative wrong. And like, I don't think we're going to see that this season. I really think like he's never going to, because there's not enough time left. He looks very clearly hobbled. To me, like, it just doesn't look to be in any kind of shape from, like, again, I know this is unfair, but like from body composition standpoint to just like he's gassed immediately. Like, and because he hasn't played, it's a calf injury. You're not running on that when you're out. I think this season for the Lakers, like, it's going to be spent looking for signs that Luka is like, oh, he's looking a little better. But I'm telling, do you think we'll see like all NBA first team level Luka at any point before next year?
I don't. My guess would be no, which would be one of my tangential items was like, what is the Lakers ceiling this season? Because even if Luka is Luka, it feels like, and the numbers don't back this up just yet because the sample size is so small, this defense should be really bad. Like with the way that they're Trey Jamison out there. What's that?
But it hasn't been somehow.
No, it hasn't been. So like maybe I'm missing something. Like Reeves has played pretty well, and like you've gotten some good minutes having from Rui, but you have Dorian Finney-Smith, Gabe Vincent's come on a little bit. Vanderbilt doesn't play in their win over the Blazers, nor did Luka, but like you have him. So maybe I'm kind of overcorrecting there, but it ties into the same thing. I just think there's no more time for him to rest. Like we've entered the stretch run. If they're going to buy him rest, it's just to kind of preserve whatever version. And you're also in this new environment where just integrating someone, such a massive, massive piece like Luka on the fly is super difficult. And then knowing kind of how, you know, if you trusted, and this isn't a great example because Dallas had Luka playing off the ball and a little bit faster over the past couple of years, like just a little bit more. But you know who JJ Redick is, and you have LeBron. So like that, forget the speed thing, but like you're going to try and use Luka in a bunch of different ways. And I think you should. Like, not that you should punt on this season. It's LeBron's age 40 season, but like you've now signaled that Luka is the future of your franchise. The experimentation begins now. Almost, you shouldn't view the consequences of this season as anything. And so I would expect that to continue as well. How long does it take to even hash out the dynamic between him and Bron and him and the rest of the team? So even if Luka is Luka, there's still that element of unfamiliarity that I think was going to I think I'll speak for myself. I always get a little overexcited in the moment. It's like, oh, the Lakers got Luka. Like, how much better are they going to be? For the most part, this shit takes time to figure out when you're dealing with high usage players. It's very rarely. I'm trying to think. Kevin Durant to Golden State was kind of the one where, yeah, there were growing pains, but the top end talent was just so good. But him and Steph Curry are two of the most plug and play superstars of all time.
And you got an off season. You didn't do it midstream. That's the other thing. Like the midstream change is like, I mean, you like, oh, Clyde Drexler to the Rockets in like 94. Like that worked out well. But like, I mean, you're digging real, like Rasheed Wallace to the Pistons. Like that was an in-season trade too. Like I don't know. Nothing else jumps readily to mind of a trade of this magnitude where I was like, no problem, hit the ground running, everything worked. And like, it might be a different conversation if Luka were the best version of himself. And like, he just isn't for a number of reasons. And like, I just don't think it's realistic for him to get there by the playoffs. And then that's the other thing. You mentioned it. Like, there are no seasons to burn with LeBron at 40. Like, so now you're hoping you get 1 year of like both of them at whatever passes for their best now. Like it is a shame. I think that like if Luka were like full on Luka and you threw him on this Lakers team and he was healthy and you know, everything was good. I would be more inclined to say like, they're going to figure it out and it's going to be terrifying. Like, I don't care about the defense. I don't care about anything else. You got those two guys, they'll figure out how to win. It's just the circumstances just aren't conducive to that right now.
And when we're looking at this, now if we focus on just Luka, and I think this is probably one of my biggest character flaws, is I understand that we do not live in a meritocracy, but I am conditioned to give people the benefit of the doubt in the sense of, let's look at Nico Harrison and the Mavericks. You can't be this fucking stupid.
Right.
Like, is what I'm thinking about in my head. And so it leads me to think, like, maybe we should worry about Luka long-term, that the fact that like, there's no one, even if you don't like him, even if you had doubts about him, just given off what he's done, you can't be so, again, fucking stupid as to just willy-nilly get rid of someone like him. And so in my head, I'm like, well, there must be something here. Like, is there just something wrong with his body or something else that we don't know about, to where you're not just worried about, are we going to get first team All NBA Luka for the rest of this season, but has for some reason this player who is only 25 years old, already a perennial MVP candidate, already made so many first team All NBA squads. Like, have we already seen the best of Luka? So like, that's kind of in the back. I will say no. I don't think that's the case, but just because this happened, and again, like I said, it might just be a character flaw on my end that I'm giving any sort of benefit of the doubt or credence to what Dallas did. I'm not gonna lie though, it's like it's still creeping up my mind to where, like, do we need to worry about this beyond this year?
Well, that's where I started with, is like, now I watch him differently, and now I think of him differently because, like, to your point, the Mavs and Nico Harrison, like, they're in a position to know, like, they have more information than anybody else. Like, you sort of like, it's like the make it make sense. Like, you just want it to be rational, because it just still, that trade, the irrational component of it will forever be, and this won't change for me, I don't think, no matter what happens, is not shopping him and not getting more than they got. Like, that will be inexcusable to me for eternity. But the idea that, like you're saying, we as Dallas think we've seen the best of him, or at least we don't think we're going to see enough of him at a level that we need to justify a supermax. Like, I don't know, man. Like, you have, as crazy as that trade seemed, I think you're right. I think you have to say you have to give a little bit of deference to the people that were around him for his whole career deciding this, because it seems crazy. And like, I'm just not ready to accept that, like, there's that level of irrational actor out there in that position.
I think two more before the Wemby thing. The one I absolutely want to get to is the who's next. So when you look back at last season, you kind of understood, oh, the Rockets, maybe even the Magic, like, those teams were next. And then the Magic at least started that like that this year. And then the Rockets are there right now. So some people might view them as next in the sense, oh, they're going to be a title contender by next season. But like, they're kind of here. And so I'm just looking at it, feels like every year, especially during this time, or at least post January 1, we all collectively settle on the team that is next for whatever reason it might be. And this year, I don't know that I just have this consensus answer to that. And so I'm wondering, is it just, oh, it's like Houston, we're just working from a higher level? Or is it, do you look at any of these other teams that are floating closer to the bottom and convince yourself, oh, like, no, like, they're putting us on notice for the next X amount of seasons?
Well, to not jump on it again too early, San Antonio would have been a nice pick here had things been different. And maybe they still are the pick. We're just not going to see the, like, tantalizing late season run that would make that. Houston's the first thought, but they're already very good. And I think we'll probably need to change a little bit to get that next level. Like, Memphis has already been established. You look at, like, the Wolves were kind of that last year. Like, I mean, I don't know what you'd call them last year, because they were just so good. Cleveland's too good to qualify. Yeah, I do see, like, a void. I don't know. Again, Orlando, if they'd been healthy, they could have been next again, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Do we go too far down if we're just saying Portland because of what they've shown lately?
That was the team. And it's, do they have, but could we just be a little early in the sense of, do they have what the Rockets did last year in them, where they're hovering around 500 in them for next season? And you're feeling a lot better about the future because now they've gone from, I think people framed their roster construction and approach as more so incoherent. And now it's transitioned to, they just have so many dudes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of entered that phase. I think they're the best candidate unless you want to focus on the high. Like, the Spurs just aren't a candidate now without Wemby. To, like, pick.
Right.
They might be next, but it's not. We're not going to see that for the rest of this season. Although they did beat the Suns without Wemby. So,
do you think the Pistons have any of that in them? I mean, they're over 500 already. I mean, they've made the jump, like the really big jump this year, because they won like 5 games last year, and they're on pace. Maybe they win 45. Like, that's totally a possibility. I just don't know they don't, to me, have the feel of, like, oh, they have all these guys that could, like, there's more. But maybe that's unfair, because you got Holland, you got Thompson, Duran is not quite at that level, and then the Ivy injury changes it. But in the East, I think they're the team I would look at hardest, but they're kind of already I mean, they're in the top 6 team in the East. They're 6th right now.
But I think, they do fit into this discussion. The reason I guess I glossed over them is that aside from Cade, and again, this might just be unfair to Thompson, to Holland, Ivy post-injury now, but there were questions beforehand and during. You don't look at this team, and aside from Cade, the forces driving everything, there's just a chance that so many of them are ephemeral, where this team isn't going to, like, the Rockets is an example. It was the question was, are they going to consolidate into a star this offseason or just run everybody back and be a lot better?
Yeah.
With the Pistons, you're not really asking about that consolidation aspect. It's, okay, well, like, what happens if Tim Hardaway and or Malik Beasley leave, and what do we feel about the Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham? As much improved as Jaden Ivey got, like, is he the best fit, like, alongside Cade or on a roster with Cade? And then Holland, like, what feel do you have for him on offense and defense after this year? And Asar Thompson, based off how you kind of want to use him on offense, does that complicate it all? Like Jaden Ivey's future here? So I think the choice, they're the highest quality choice right now, but there's just something, not to say that they won't be good next year, but there's something about what we're watching where it feels like, well, it could just look materially different in a way that's uncomfortable, that I still think I would gravitate toward. Now, if you ask me who's going to be better next year, the answer should probably just be the Pistons. I think they've earned that, but Portland might be the team that I'm kind of watching there, but maybe Detroit has been too competent for too long this season for me to.
Yeah, I think using Houston, I don't know why we're stuck on this, but I keep doing it too. Using Houston as like the point of comparison, the Blazers feel more like that, because with the Rockets, it was like there were way fewer, like you're talking about, like overlap or like fit questions. Cause like, well, Jabari Smith Jr., defense and spacing, Şengün, elbow hub, Thompson, I don't know, whatever. And you like Jalen Green has shown major shooting potential, and Tari Eason's the hustle guy. And like everybody was like fitting into these little boxes. I think the diversity of like talent types with a little bit like some like backcourt skewing stuff with the Blazers is more like that than the Pistons setup is, because you do have like, are Holland and Thompson like really viable next to Cunningham? Like, is that like maybe, but like there need to be like skill developments. Whereas with the Rockets, it was just like, I don't know, there's almost like too many like nice fits and like different combos that make sense. It's pretty different that way as we talk about it.
My final one before we get to Wemby. So we have the who's next. My question is, who are we overlooking? Like, what is the team that could really, I think we already kind of mentioned the Pacers. The Nuggets, it feels weird to say this, they're just quietly number 2 in the West at this point and taking care of business. But I think you could also make, I feel like people are kind of writing off Memphis and Houston in the context of the postseason. And then my actual pick, I think you could even argue for the Timberwolves as well. My actual pick is just, should we be paying more attention to what the Clippers are doing? Like, they've annihilated teams when Kawhi, James Harden, and Ivica Zubac are on the floor. And now the sample size is sub 700 possessions, but like Kawhi's playing basketball again. Right. This defense is actual hellfire. They traded for Bogdan Bogdanovic, where if he is just if he's just even more available than he was in Atlanta, he improves their team. And then if he's actually making shots, like he's exactly the type of player that they needed at full strength. And so I look at them and I say, now they're coming off a loss as I record this, of which I only saw a little bit of. But like, why aren't we just, not that we should say, oh, they're tier 1 title contender, but if Kawhi is going to be there, which is a big if, like, are we just kind of sleeping on this team? Even though you and I have now acknowledged that we were wrong on the Clippers to start the year. They've had a hell of a season. The defense is incredible. Even James Harden just like being able to kind of turn back the clock in the sense of, oh, this is going to be not just high usage, but obscenely difficult high usage. And like just being able to survive that when you're looking at the games that he's played. I think they're the team that are still being over, like they're in the top 6 in the West. And I kind of what I said about the Warriors, aside from the Thunder, I don't know what team you sit here and tell me like, oh, this team is guaranteed to beat the Clippers in a best of 7 series if the Clippers are healthy.
That's the thing. So they would play the Grizzlies in a first round series if the playoffs started today. And I mean, the Grizzlies would be favored in that, but like they're going to be at home, but still, like, I think you're right. Like you'd have to say, I don't know if Kawhi is really ready to go, like it feels kind of coin flippy to me, which is not what you'd typically say about a 6-3 playoff matchup. I think they are being overlooked. I continue to overlook them. And I think the reason is just that like there's nobody that feels like they're doing anything but playing over their heads or like hanging on. You know what I mean? Like that. It's
Yeah,
like Zubats has been amazing, and it's just like, well, like he can't be better than this. So like, what's the upside for them? And then like Kawhi has been on the floor, but has just not been quite what he was, which is should be the expectation given his age and injury history. And Harden feels like he's just hanging on, like just doing enough to make that defense like hold up, like being okay. It's sufficient on ball creator at crazy volume. Like you know what I mean? Like I feel like they're older. We know who a lot of these guys are, and it's hard to believe that like they can A, sustain this, or B, I mean, even more certainly like do better. So I think
right.
that's why they're being overlooked, but like they're just objectively a good team. Like they're, they're going to bump up in the high 40s, like win total potentially. So yeah, I think I definitely based on my like league pass viewing preferences, the Clippers are very, very overlooked.
Yeah, they added Ben Simmons too. I actually think that he could become, if they decide that, hey, we need to play him 20 minutes a game, I think that could actually become a detriment for them. I think that Ben Simmons still has his use, but it needs to be viewed as spot usage that's not guaranteed.
Right.
But like, if Bogdanovich is going to hit, what is he shooting? Like he's been shooting 40% from three in the, 2 or 3 games he's
He
played.
looks a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, what would be the other team though if you had to pick one that we're overlooking? Is it Indy? Is it Minnesota? Is it one of the Houstons or Memphises?
I think, well, I don't know. Minnesota feels disappointing ultimately, so I don't know if that's overlooking them.
I still believe in their ceiling, which
Yeah.
is I don't know that I have like a good reason why. I think the play of Jaden McDaniel over the past like couple months has helped out a ton. And so I just look at it and say they feel like a team that might disappoint us in the regular season, but like they will fuck you up in the playoffs.
Well, then do we have to just mention the Heat? They lost 4 straight going into the break, so like maybe not. But does the Adebayo Ware Hero triumvirate like get you interested at least?
If Tyler Hero doesn't believe in them, then I can't either. You saw what he said, where he called, and I respect the candor. He's like, we're not contenders, and they're not. So I think if I had to pick another team, it'd probably be, we already mentioned them, it would be the Pacers. I just like they're 4th in the East, and it's just sort of, oh, all right, like no, that might actually matter with the way that they've been able to cobble together, and like Nemhard and Neesmith is now back, and like Miles Turner's looked a lot more like himself. Pascal Siakam's having a really good season. I think they're another team to where, okay, like I said, I feel better about them than the Knicks in the playoffs, but like, let's see if some of the defensive success they had holds up in the postseason. That would be a question I have, but they're deep. They could play a lot of different ways. And I feel like that's been over. Like if we were to pick one from each conference, it'd be Clippers Pacers for me for sure.
I think Andrew Nemhard had the nastiest slow step last night on a breakaway where John Morant, I think, was sure that he was going to like shotgun the block like right through the backboard, and Nemhard just stopped. It was unbelievable.
It was such a throwaway play, but like this just felt like how keyed in the Pacers are right now. Like Miles Turner throwing a swing pass to the corner, like after the catch, I was like, that's just not like a Miles Turner thing. I was like, this team is just so locked in right now. I'm like, yeah, they've had some bad games. I think they went out and got hammered by the Knicks immediately after I said I feel better about them in the playoffs than the Knicks. But that team, they might be ready to do some spicy things.
We've seen them hit an offensive level that's like, oh God, like this is the best offense on planet Earth for like very long stretches, and this was not that long ago. So yeah, the Pacers are really, maybe they do deserve to be viewed as dangerous or more dangerous than the Knicks. Something to chew on.
You want to talk to us about that Victor Wembanyama guy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge bummer. It sounds like the blood clot or the deep vein thrombosis is like not, it's more Brandon Ingram, Asar Thompson than Chris Bosh. So like severity wise and long-term outlook wise, it seems like it's not as, I don't know, it's still very, very scary, obviously.
The lungs were not mentioned. That was like
no vital organs involved. So that's a plus. But he's done for the year. I think that's just, what other choice do they have? But then that just sort of, I mean, it's difficult to think of, certainly among non-playoff teams, a single player going out that just so fundamentally overhauls like everything about the rest of the season for his team. Because now, you raise all these questions from starting with like, okay, well, do we just tank? Because it'd be super awesome to have another, high lottery pick here. And then if the answer is yes, like, well, but how realistically, like, how far can we fall? Like, we're not going to get into the bottom 4 records. That seems
Mhm.
impossible. So from there, it's like, well, do we give De'Aaron Fox every other night off? Considering like, what are we playing for? And we're not going to learn anything about how he interfaces with Wemby, which is like the most important thing. Do we mess around with like, okay, Steph Castle, you are the point guard for 40 minutes. Let's see what happens. Or like that's just, look, if they're going to play Sohan at point guard, you got it. Like there's, you know what I mean? Like you can just,
Yeah.
is this a full on experiment now to just see like if there's anything that we can learn from the balance of this season that will inform next year's version of the team and like next year's version? Like what do you try to salvage if you're the Spurs?
I think the one thing I'm still exploring is, okay, so what does the dynamic between Castle and Fox together look like? Because I think you can argue Wemby's might be one of the best players of all time if he stays healthy, but like he could be super plug and play. And
Yeah.
so can you work out a dynamic with whoever you're playing in the middle with Steph Castle and De'Aaron Fox so that you have the blueprint for what, because that was one of my bigger concerns. Like I think
Mhm.
the Vassell of it all, that'll be fine. That'll work itself out. Jeremy Sohan gets in there with awkward, but he's not someone that they're as married to at the moment as a Castle. One of the harbingers though will be, do you just buy out Chris Paul at this point? I mean, if he really wants to come back, you could sign him in free agency next season, but you have De'Aaron Fox, you have Steph Castle, and now you're not, your playing odds were kind of long to begin with. Without Victor
Mhm.
Wembanyama, they're basically gone. He might have an opportunity. He's making less than the mid-level this year, so he can sign with whoever he wants. That's like someone who might want to go to the playoffs, and that might be a different discussion. I mean, that is a different discussion. Like, where would Chris Paul actually be fun to watch right now?
Mhm.
But it would also be a signal of, okay, the Spurs are really leaning into full experimentation mode. Is there a chance, though, that you think they view it internally as maybe we could still make up this ground in the West and usurp, 2 of the teams that are in front of you to get into one of the top 10 spots?
I I don't I mean they might believe that, but like, well, I'm just pulling it up now. So they're 3 back of the 10th spot right now. Like, are you gonna and you we certainly Phoenix is more incentivized to chase that than the Spurs are, and Portland's right there behind them. The Warriors we think will be a lot better. Maybe Dallas falls out, and yeah, I guess there is a scenario where they could say, might as well, let's get some of these other young guys some experience in like meaningful games. Maybe. I just don't know. It's the age old question of like, is the payoff of that worth sacrificing a little bit of draft position? Like, I don't know. I think, to me, if it's me, I think you spend the rest of the year doing what you were talking about. Like, okay, what do Fox and Castle, how do we do, like, is this viable? And if it's not, does that mean Fox isn't the number 2 we need going forward, or does it mean Castle needs to be a different kind of player? Like, I think that's the smartest way to use the rest of the season. But San Antonio, they might really just try to win games like that might have some value to them.
And they'll probably lose games even as they're trying anyway, would be my guess. I mean,
Yeah.
De'Aaron Fox is now here, so it changes the complexion of this, but they're a minus 9.3 per 100 without Victor Wembanyama on the court. And so
Yeah.
even if you would have to, you mentioned this at the top of, well, how far do you actually think that you could bottom out? Because you're the closest team below you is 4 losses worth. So it's like, and none of them below you, except for maybe the Sixers, are actively trying to win now. So we're talking about maybe a spot you could fall, I would argue. I think there's probably just more value in trying to figure out what you have while trying to win. And if you happen to organically win and get into playing, great. And if not, like, you're probably going to just, right, you're going to end up, but again, it comes down to how far down do you think they could tank? I'm actually wondering, I have 2 more questions on this. And there's one that's just more important. Does this materially change at all how you now approach the long-term future? Because there's this unsettling thing happening to Victor Wembanyama. They believe it's a one-off. That's important. I'm not writing him off by any means, but like, let's even look at it, shrink the window a little more. Does it impact maybe how aggressive you were going to be leading into this offseason? I don't think you're at a point where it's, oh, we regret trading for De'Aaron Fox, we don't want to pay him now.
Yeah.
But I think we all kind of talked about, all right, they're going to get this year's pick, and then what's next? Is there going to be more of a reluctance to explore what's next beyond what's already in place because of the Victor Wembanyama issue?
Yeah, great question. I think it can be really easy and the Spurs situation with Wembanyama is like an extreme example of this. It can be easy to think, well, we've got forever. Look at all these future firsts we have, and we can build however we want around Wembanyama. We can be as patient as we want to. I think so. So Wembanyama missing the rest of the season, it's just a reminder that like nothing's promised. And if you can, it's kind of like how like the Pacers kind of went for it with the Siakam trade. Like even though Halliburton is a young cornerstone, like I think, and I do think going out and getting Fox this year suggests to me that the Spurs weren't looking at like a 5-year time horizon. It's like, no, we'll try to get as good as we can get within reason. So that's encouraging. But yeah, you have to look at this as like as a signal, as a reminder that as great as Wemby projects to be, like shit can happen. And there's no guarantee that his age 28 season will be exactly on the trajectory you think it will. And it's like, we're not timing, our peak to 2031 or whatever it is. Like you do just have to try to win as best you can without going nuts and going Phoenix Suns or whatever, like, fairly immediately. And I do think the Spurs were doing that, to some extent. So yeah, if anything, speed it up. Like, because
you think it'll increase the urgency?
Well, I mean, by the way, we'll make dovetail into something else here, but like I had Wemby as still making all NBA first team this year before he got hurt. So how much better do you need your key guy to be before you start going after it? Like he's there now,
I'm wondering if I would agree with you, but maybe what it does is changes nothing because that urgency was already extant.
Maybe so.
But I would almost think, are they going to be more reticent to indulge that urgency because now they get whatever lottery pick is going to we're assuming this year. You have Fox, you have Castle, you have Sohan, you have Vassell. I don't think that they're going to try and slow it down and start trading things like players for more picks, but I would be curious. I won't predict. I tend to agree with you that I think if anything, it should speed up the urgency within reason. But in the back of my mind, I'm kind of wondering if it feels like there just might be a chance that they'll take a step back, see what he looks like next year. Not a step back in terms of let's get worse, but maybe they're not going to be as aggressive on the free agent market, or maybe they would have made trades had he finished the season healthy, won Defensive Player of the Year, made first team All NBA. It would have been easier for them internally to say, yeah, we're going to continue to just go quote unquote all in, even though again, they've done nothing that's like super egregious or like mortgage their future to the hilt. This just adds another layer of uncertainty. And I think, look, you go one of two ways, like New Orleans with Zion. Like you could say that they took all these half measures trying to build a team in the image of having him, but also not having him. The Spurs can't afford to do the same, but like, it's also early enough to where it's, well, like, let's kind of see how this plays out before we go, because wouldn't this be the difference if you're worried about his availability moving forward? It's the difference between saying we need a second or third best player versus we might need someone who can be our best player when Wemby's not there.
Yeah. I think you sort of owe it to the windfall that was getting Wembanyama to like be as ambitious as you possibly can. Like, I really don't think you can say Fox is number 2. Like, I think you need to view him as the third best player. So I guess, yeah, in answer to your question, I think like the next guy you go get, as the Spurs, I hope they're aiming at someone that's like, oh, he's good enough to make us a playoff team without Wembanyama.
Yeah.
Because if we have him and that guy, then we're a contender. Like that needs to be the level of player they're trying to get.
My guess would be that they are less likely to go out and get that guy now, though, this offseason. And they might not have been especially likely to do it, but my guess now, just based off how the Spurs have historically operated and just based off kind of the stakes here, because maybe what Wemby is next season informs what you want in yourself, because that's the other thing is you still need to figure out that the De'Aaron Fox and the Wemby of it all, who's the ideal second best archetype. You're not going to have, we have hunches. We've talked about it already post trade deadline. Like, you're not going to have an ironclad idea now just because they're not going to play together again this year.
Yeah. You're losing a lot of like valuable research time. That's in addition to all the rest of it. That hurts a lot.
Now, this is, I think, the least important question of anything we ask. What happens to Defensive Player of the Year? And like even the All NBA stuff, there's kind of just like, there's shifts. Like, it's okay. Like, okay, you'll just shift everyone up a notch. And then it's the difference. Like maybe Kyrie makes an All NBA team or it's just something. what happens with defense? Who's the favorite to win defensive player? That we know who the betting favorite is because it's come out. But like, who is your defensive player of the year pick? Is it a 2-man race between Mobley and Jaren Jackson Jr.? Is there anyone else who could creep up? And finally, I just want to reiterate how much of a bummer it is because we assume that Wemby was going to win multiple defensive players of the year. But like, this is kind of always, I'm not saying there's something permanently wrong with him, but this is a reminder, as you said, that anyone can be fleeting. And so we just say, oh, he'll win defensive player of the year again at some point. But like, nothing is necessarily given. So it's just a bummer that he seemed like he was running away with this award. And if he wasn't running away, he at least deserved to win it.
Right.
And now he's not going to be eligible to win it.
Yeah, I think it just is Jackson or Mobley. And it might honestly, I feel like Jackson has the momentum, which is like, we're talking about what voters think. So that actually does matter. And it is a thing. It's not like talking about momentum within a game or anything. I think, like, don't you think that this stretch run really will just decide it? Because now the race is different and now voters can't, honestly, like, I feel like a lot of voters would have tuned out because it's like, Wemby's got it. What are we talking about? Like, let's worry about 6-man or something.
Now they're gonna have to do something other than cite blocks. It's gonna be tough.
Yeah. I think this stretch run's gonna decide it. I don't know. I can't remember what I know Jackson is the favorite, but like, it feels like either of those two guys, whoever, plays better or whoever voters seem to think is having a bigger impact down the stretch, like that guy's gonna win it. I would like it if there were like another, like a dark horse that might be someone to consider, like, oh my God, Amin Thompson, there's some crazy stat that comes out that shows how disruptive he is or that we hadn't thought about. But, Chet obviously won't have enough games. He would definitely be involved in this if he had not been out for so much time. Is there anybody else that we're not thinking of? Like, we did all defensive teams like not that long ago. I just can't remember anyone else being like a serious consideration.
I think Bam could have a real shot depending on how the Heat close. I just think the world, like, that's how much I just think of Bam defensively. And I also think there's going to be a push because we talked about them already. The Thunder have a generationally good defense. There's going to be an inclination to identify, someone there should win it. And I don't agree that that's how it should work because if anything, that dilutes the accomplishments of the entire committee by saying, no, one person was more responsible than everybody else. And just like when you're looking at the primary options, the betting odds would have, I think it's Lou Dort, Shea, and J-Dub are in the top 5 or 7 now of defensive player of the year odds. I couldn't bring myself to vote for either of them. Like, it's cool that the Thunder are this good defensively, but I don't think you look at any one of them and say they've been the best, most valuable defender in the league.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean,
No.
Anthony Davis might have had a case.
I was just going to say, if he had not gotten hurt, I feel, and had gone on a run with Dallas, he would have been a name to throw in there for sure. Yeah, I mean, like, you're not going to get a Celtic. Like, Holiday's not there anymore, and that's again another committee thing. Tatum's never going to win Defensive Player of the Year, even though he's so important to what they do. Like, Giannis has not been the same as he used to. Yeah, I mean, like, there's all these, like, what if Jalen Suggs hadn't missed a bunch of time? Like, maybe that would be the way you'd go. It's going to be Jackson or Mobley unless something crazy happens, I would say.
Now, I actually have a bonus question for this. Do you think, not the Wemby absence specifically, but just as a compounding catalyst, the NBA is going to have to revisit this eligibility thing at some point, right, for awards? Because we're now getting to the point where what is the pool of players from which we're going to be choosing? Like, how deep is it actually going to run? Let's look at all NBA as the example. 15 spots. And is there going to be, there's 100 eligible players for it, and like of those 100, like 25, like, it just makes it almost like it dilutes maybe the significance of that. I'm not saying now Wemby's going to finish with sub 50 appearances this year, so he might not have made an all NBA team anyway, but it does create some type of inflexibility here. That is it at a baseline level, are we in danger of kind of watering down the significance of making an all NBA team, let's say, because of the way that the eligibility requirements work?
Well, I mean, isn't it fair to say the 65 game threshold was, if not totally driven by, at least like partially driven by the TV deal? Like, we got to get our best players out there as often as possible so the TV deal is bigger. Like, that's a thing, right? Like, so deal done. And like, we can decide as a voting body if 62 games at level X is better than 71 at level Y, which because we've been doing it forever.
Yeah.
So like I think the 65 game thing feels arbitrary, feels not totally like, I mean, it's there for reasons other than we need it to determine who should or shouldn't be eligible. So I think we could dispense with it and just get back to having to make a tough decision, and set our own cutoffs. Like, okay, if you play 50 games or fewer, you got to be like, what level do you have to be at to deserve this over someone that played 75 games? Like that we can do that. I think we're capable of doing that.
And,
apples to slightly different sized apples comparison.
and I will say, just as this is not the end all be all, but like per EPM, currently of the top 10 players in actual, like as we're recording this EPM, there's a chance that 4 of them won't be eligible for awards. That's, I'm with you. I think that is probably time to get back. And I agree with that's why that's been implemented. You got anything else, or are you ready to take us out of here?
I think we covered every storyline there is to cover. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening. Check us out if you're watching this on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think, what storylines we missed. Join our Discord. Links in the YouTube and podcast description. I think that's going to cover it. We close as always with shouts to Frank Ntilikina and apologies to Jared Allen.